In the realm of Stoicism, wisdom is often drawn from life's quiet observations, from the whispers of experience that teach us more than any loud proclamation. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great philosophers of this school of thought, lived his life as an emperor not for power, but to cultivate inner virtue. His words offer insight into how we might lead lives of simplicity, moderation, and mindfulness, guiding us to understand that there are certain things we should hold within, never shared with others, for they belong to our most sacred self. So, it is not because these things are shameful, or because others would not understand. Rather, it is about protecting the inner sanctuary of the mind, a place that should remain free of external influence and judgment. What Marcus teaches is that true strength lies not in what we display to the world, but in what we can keep private, nurturing silently. Think of your inner self like a garden. You would not leave it open for anyone to walk through, trample on, or even admire too closely. This garden needs its boundaries and its walls to preserve what is precious and delicate inside. There is wisdom in discretion, in recognizing that not everything must be shared or made public. And so, through the lens of Stoicism, we explore the idea that there are aspects of our lives, thoughts, emotions, and experiences that should remain ours alone. Imagine walking through life with a sense of calm detachment, not because you are cold or indifferent, but because you understand that the things you experience and the emotions you feel are transient and they do not define you. This understanding forms the backbone of Stoic thought. It teaches us to respond with measured calm and to observe the world as it is without being swept away by it. And in this quiet contemplation, we find strength. Strength in what we withhold just as much as in what we express. In the world of Stoicism, much of what defines our strength comes not from how we interact with the world outside, but from how we manage and master the world inside us. When Marcus Aurelius spoke of the importance of guarding one's inner life, he was not just offering a strategy for surviving the trials of daily existence, but rather a profound philosophy for living a life of virtue, resilience, and wisdom. This philosophy can be distilled into one fundamental tenet: the struggles and fears that live within us should remain our own, not to be shared casually or vulnerably with others. To truly grasp the depth of this principle, we must journey into the heart of Stoic thought and examine why such inner struggles, doubts, and fears are so vital to our personal development and why they must be carefully guarded. The human condition is one of constant internal fluctuation. Every individual, regardless of status, wealth, or wisdom, will encounter moments of self-doubt, fear, anxiety, and inner turmoil. It is a natural and unavoidable part of existence, a universal truth that has persisted throughout history. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, was not immune to these feelings. In fact, his meditations, often read like a personal dialogue with himself as he grappled with the weight of responsibility, the unpredictability of life, and the certainty of death. Yet, for all the struggles he faced, Aurelius remained steadfast in his belief that one should never allow such feelings to be openly shared or aired in public. They were to be contained, reflected upon, and ultimately mastered in the quiet of one's own mind. At first glance, this might seem counterintuitive. In the modern age, we are often encouraged to open up and to share our feelings with others. There is a pervasive belief that by revealing our inner struggles and fears, we will somehow lessen their burden. However, Marcus Aurelius would have regarded this as a misguided notion. In the Stoic worldview, sharing our inner turmoil with others does not lessen the burden, but often amplifies it. distorting our sense of self-control and strength. It is not that others cannot sympathize with us or offer solace, but that the act of sharing shifts the focus away from self-reliance and resilience and onto external validation. The more we expose our inner fears and struggles to others, the more we risk becoming dependent on their approval, their understanding, or their judgment. Aurelius understood that the mind is a sacred space. It is the seat of our reason, the source of our virtue, and the final battleground for all of life's challenges. In this space, there must be order, discipline, and sovereignty. To invite others into this space, especially during moments of vulnerability, risks contaminating the purity of thought that is required for personal growth. When we share our doubts or fears with others, we inadvertently allow their perspectives, opinions, and biases to enter our mind, clouding our judgment and weakening our ability to confront and overcome our challenges independently. This is not to suggest that one should become an emotional hermit, forever disconnected from the world around them. Stoicism does not advocate for isolation, but rather for mastery over oneself. The key distinction is in how we approach our internal struggles. Instead of seeking external solutions to internal problems, we must learn to cultivate the inner strength needed to confront those problems head-on. This is where the true Stoic discipline lies, training the mind to withstand the inevitable difficulties of life without relying on others to shoulder the burden for us. To understand this more deeply, we must look at the Stoic concept of control. According to Marcus Aurelius, and indeed to all Stoic thinkers, the only thing we truly have control over is our own mind. We cannot control the actions of others or the circumstances we find ourselves in, but we can always control how we react to those things. This is the essence of Stoic freedom. True liberation comes not from changing the world around us, but from mastering the world within us. When we share our inner struggles with others, we give away a portion of that control. We allow others to influence how we think and feel, often in ways that are subtle but deeply impactful. For example, imagine that you are grappling with a deep fear of failure. This fear has gnawed at you for weeks, perhaps months. You feel as though you are standing at the precipice of a great opportunity, but the fear of falling short keeps you paralyzed. In a moment of weakness, you decide to share this fear with a friend or a colleague, hoping for reassurance or guidance. Despite the fact that their response may have been well-intended, their personal histories, anxieties, and views on failure have now influenced it. They may offer words of encouragement or caution, but in doing so, they have now placed their imprint on your internal struggle. An outside force now affects your fear, which was once a very personal battle. The purity of your own mind, your own reasoning, has been compromised. This is why Marcus Aurelius placed such emphasis on self-reliance in his meditations. He repeatedly reminded himself to look inward for strength and to seek wisdom from within rather than from the opinions of others. He knew that the mind is a fortress, and like any fortress, it must be guarded. Allowing others into that space, especially during moments of vulnerability, risks weakening the walls of that fortress. And once those walls are breached, it becomes increasingly difficult to restore the strength and resilience that are required for true Stoic living. It is also worth considering the role that fear itself plays in Stoic philosophy. For the Stoics, fear is not something to be avoided or suppressed, but rather something to be understood and confronted. Fear is a natural part of life, but it is only when we allow fear to dominate our thoughts and actions that it becomes destructive. By keeping our fears private, we create the space needed to fully engage with them. We can examine the roots of our fear, understand why it has taken hold, and begin the process of dismantling it. This is an internal process, one that requires solitude, reflection, and mental discipline. Sharing our fears with others disrupts this process and can often lead to confusion or even reinforcement of the fear itself. Marcus Aurelius also believed that sharing one's fears could lead to unintended consequences. When we reveal our vulnerabilities to others, we expose ourselves to their judgment, whether conscious or unconscious. People may sympathize with us, but they may also perceive us as weaker or less capable than we truly are. This is not a reflection of their character, but of human nature. People are naturally inclined to form judgments, and when we reveal our fears, we give them more material to form those judgments. Over time, this can erode our confidence and self-worth as we become increasingly aware of how others perceive us. Furthermore, Marcus Aurelius understood that life is filled with challenges that we must face alone. No one else can live our lives for us. No one else can fight our internal battles. By sharing our inner struggles, we run the risk of becoming overly reliant on the support of others. This reliance can become a crutch, preventing us from developing the mental toughness needed to navigate life's difficulties on our own. The Stoic path is one of self-sufficiency, where the individual learns to draw strength from within, rather than seeking it from external sources. To strengthen the mind, Marcus Aurelius often practiced the technique of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This exercise involved mentally preparing for the worst-case scenarios in life, from loss and failure to death itself. By contemplating these possibilities, Aurelius was able to confront his fears directly, without the need for external reassurance. This practice allowed him to build resilience as he trained his mind to accept whatever life might throw at him. In this way, he cultivated a mindset that was not dependent on the opinions or judgments of others, but rather grounded in his own internal strength. Another important aspect of Stoicism is the belief that emotions like fear and anxiety are often based on false perceptions or misunderstandings of reality. Marcus Aurelius frequently reminded himself to question the validity of his emotions, asking whether they were truly justified or whether they were simply the result of distorted thinking. By keeping his inner struggles private, he was able to engage in this process of self-examination without the interference of external voices. This allowed him to gain clarity and perspective as he sought to align his thoughts with reality rather than with the fears and doubts that often cloud our judgment. Moreover, by keeping his fears to himself, Aurelius was able to maintain a sense of dignity and composure, even in the face of great adversity. Stoicism places a high value on the concept of ataraxia, or inner calmness. This state of tranquility is achieved through the mastery of one's emotions, and it is difficult to maintain if we are constantly sharing our inner turmoil with others. When we allow our fears to spill out into the open, we risk losing the sense of peace and stability that comes from self-control. Marcus Aurelius knew that true strength lies in the ability to maintain this inner calm, even in the most challenging circumstances. There is a certain power that comes from maintaining one's privacy. When we keep our inner struggles to ourselves, we preserve a sense of autonomy and independence. We are not subject to the judgments or opinions of others, and we are in complete control of our thoughts and feelings. This is a form of personal freedom that Marcus Aurelius highly valued. By guarding his inner life, he was able to remain true to himself, unencumbered by the expectations or perceptions of those around him. This allowed him to act with integrity, making decisions based on reason and virtue rather than on the influence of others. The Stoic principle of keeping one's inner struggles and fears private is not about isolation or emotional suppression, but about cultivating the strength and resilience needed to confront life's challenges with dignity and self-reliance. Marcus Aurelius understood that the mind is a sacred space, one that must be carefully guarded if we are to achieve true mastery over ourselves. By keeping our fears to ourselves, we preserve the clarity, discipline, and inner calm needed to live a life of virtue and wisdom. In the writings of Marcus Aurelius, a profound Stoic principle emerges regarding the notion of keeping one's plans and intentions private. This teaching reflects not just a practical strategy for achieving success, but an essential philosophy rooted in self-discipline, focus, and the understanding of human nature. At its core, Marcus Aurelius believed that by sharing your plans with others, you risk diluting the strength of your resolve, opening yourself up to unnecessary distractions, and compromising the purity of your purpose. The wisdom of this advice lies in recognizing that the path to achieving one's goals is often solitary, and revealing too much too soon can invite complications that undermine the original intent. When we consider why sharing our plans prematurely can be detrimental, we must first examine the nature of human motivation and resolve. Setting a goal or intention is, in many ways, a deeply personal act. It is born from an internal drive, a vision that we alone hold, and that vision requires nurturing in its early stages. When we share our goals with others, we expose them to external influences that can shape and distort our original purpose. Even the act of talking about our intentions can shift the focus from the quiet, steady pursuit of the goal to the external validation we might seek from others. This is not to say that external encouragement is inherently harmful, but it can create a dependency that weakens our internal drive. Marcus Aurelius, as both a philosopher and an emperor, understood the weight of responsibility and the need for clarity of purpose. He was no stranger to the complexities of leadership, where every action and decision was scrutinized. Yet despite the demands of his role, he consistently turned inward for guidance and strength. His belief in keeping one's plans private was not a rejection of collaboration or teamwork, but a recognition of the importance of safeguarding one's vision from premature exposure. By holding his intentions close, Aurelius ensured that his actions were driven by his own reason and virtue, rather than by the shifting opinions of those around him. One of the primary risks of sharing one's plans too early is the inevitable introduction of doubt. When we reveal our goals to others, we open ourselves to their interpretations, their criticisms, and their judgments. Even those who mean well may offer advice or feedback that, while intended to be helpful, can plant seeds of uncertainty. Every individual carries their own biases, shaped by their experiences and worldview, and when we allow their input to influence our plans, we may find ourselves questioning our original intentions. This can lead to second-guessing, hesitation, and ultimately, a loss of momentum. Consider the scenario of someone embarking on a creative project, a writer drafting a novel, for instance. In the initial stages, the writer's vision is still fragile, unformed, and vulnerable to outside influence. If the writer begins sharing the details of the plot, the characters, or the themes with others, they may encounter a range of reactions. Some may offer enthusiastic support, while others may express skepticism or suggest changes that, in their opinion, would improve the story. While these responses are often well-meaning, they can introduce doubt into the writer's mind, making them question their original ideas. The more feedback they receive, the more the project becomes a reflection of external opinions rather than the writer's true vision. Marcus Aurelius would have cautioned against this type of premature sharing. For him, the purity of one's intention was paramount. The ideal of the Stoic is to conduct oneself with virtue and purpose, rather than out of a desire for approval or a fear of criticism. When we share our plans with others, we risk becoming entangled in their expectations, which can lead us away from our original path. The discipline required to stay true to one's purpose is difficult enough without the added burden of external opinions. By keeping our intentions private, we protect our goals from the distorting effects of outside influence and preserve the clarity needed to pursue them with unwavering focus. Another danger of sharing one's plans too early is the psychological effect of prematurely receiving praise or validation. There is a phenomenon known as social reality, where the act of sharing a goal can create a sense of accomplishment before any real progress has been made. When we tell others about our intentions, we may receive positive reinforcement, congratulations, admiration, or encouragement that can give us a false sense of achievement. This early validation can diminish the urgency and drive needed to follow through on the plan itself, the mind, having already received its reward in the form of external praise, may lose some of its motivation to continue striving toward the actual goal. Marcus Aurelius, who valued action over words, would have understood this psychological trap. In his writings, he often reminded himself to focus on what he could control, his actions, his thoughts, his efforts, rather than on the outcomes or the perceptions of others. For him, it was the process of striving toward virtue and excellence that mattered, not the accolades or recognition that might follow. By keeping his plans and intentions private, he maintained his focus on the work itself, free from the distractions of external validation. There is also a practical reason for keeping one's plans private, particularly in competitive or high-stakes environments. When we reveal our intentions to others, we may inadvertently provide them with information that they can use to their advantage. This is especially true in situations where competition is involved, whether in business, politics, or personal pursuits. By sharing our plans, we expose our strategies and give others the opportunity to act in ways that may counter or undermine our efforts. Even in more casual settings, sharing too much about our goals can lead to jealousy or rivalry, as others may feel threatened by our ambition or success. Marcus Aurelius, as emperor, would have been acutely aware of the dangers of revealing too much about his intentions, both in political and military contexts. The Roman Empire was filled with intrigue, power struggles, and competing interests, and any hint of the emperor's plans could have been exploited by those seeking to advance their own agendas. By keeping his intentions private, Aurelius protected not only his own position, but also the stability of the empire. His restraint in sharing his plans was a form of strategic wisdom, allowing him to act decisively without giving his adversaries the opportunity to interfere. Yet, even beyond the realms of politics and competition, there is a deeper philosophical reason for guarding one's plans and intentions. For the Stoics, the true value of any action lies in the intention behind it. The virtue of the action comes not from the external outcome, but from the internal motivation, the reason and purpose that drive the individual to act. When we share our plans with others, we risk shifting our focus from the internal motivation to the external result. We may become more concerned with how our actions will be perceived or with the approval we hope to receive, rather than with the integrity of the action itself. This is why Marcus Aurelius placed such importance on acting in accordance with one's own reason and virtue. The Stoic path is one of self-mastery, where the individual seeks to align their actions with their highest principles, regardless of how those actions are perceived by others. By keeping one's plans private, the Stoic practitioner can maintain a clear sense of purpose, unclouded by the opinions or judgments of others. The focus remains on the action itself rather than on the external rewards or recognition that might follow. There is also a significant emotional component to this philosophy. When we share our plans with others, we open ourselves up to the emotional highs and lows that come with their reactions. If others respond positively, we may feel a temporary boost in confidence or excitement. But if they respond negatively, we may experience doubt, disappointment, or even a sense of failure before we have even begun. These emotional fluctuations can be distracting and can pull us away from the steady, disciplined approach needed to achieve our goals. Marcus Aurelius understood the importance of emotional equanimity in the pursuit of one's intentions. In his meditations, he frequently reminded himself to remain calm and composed, regardless of the external circumstances. He sought to cultivate an inner state of tranquility, where his actions were guided by reason rather than by emotional impulses. By keeping his plans private, he was able to maintain this emotional balance, protecting himself from the unpredictable reactions of others. This allowed him to stay focused on his goals, undistracted by the emotional highs and lows that often accompany external validation or criticism. Another important aspect of Stoic philosophy is the idea that our actions should be guided by what is within our control. According to Marcus Aurelius, we cannot control how others will react to our plans or whether external circumstances will align in our favor. What we can control, however, is our own effort and determination. When we share our plans with others, we risk placing too much emphasis on factors beyond our control, such as their opinions or the obstacles they may present. This can lead to frustration, anxiety, or a sense of powerlessness, as we become overly concerned with how our plans will be received or executed. By keeping our intentions private, we retain full control over our own actions and decisions. We are not swayed by the uncertainties of external reactions or circumstances. Instead, we focus on what we can do in the present moment to move toward our goals. This focus on the present is a key component of Stoic philosophy. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the present moment is all we truly have, and that worrying about the future or seeking approval from others only distracts us from what we can accomplish here and now. By keeping his plans private, he ensured that his energy and attention were directed toward the actions he could take in the present, rather than on the uncertainties of the future. There is also a moral dimension to this principle. The Stoics believed that our actions should be guided by virtue and reason, rather than by the pursuit of external rewards or recognition. When we share our plans with others, we may inadvertently shift our focus away from the virtue of the action itself and toward the potential rewards or approval we hope to receive. This can compromise the integrity of our actions, as we become more concerned with how we will be perceived than with the moral value of the action itself. For Marcus Aurelius, the true measure of any action was whether it aligned with his highest principles, whether it was driven by virtue, reason, and a commitment to the greater good. By keeping his plans private, he was able to ensure that his actions were motivated by these internal values, rather than by a desire for external validation. This allowed him to act with integrity and purpose, guided by his own sense of right and wrong rather than by the shifting opinions of those around him. Ultimately, the Stoic principle of keeping one's plans and intentions private is not about secrecy or isolation, but about maintaining clarity, focus, and self-discipline. It is about recognizing that the path to achieving one's goals is often solitary, and that the distractions of external validation or criticism can lead us astray. By guarding our plans and keeping them close, we protect the purity of our purpose and ensure that our actions are guided by reason, virtue, and a commitment to what is within our control. This is the essence of Stoic wisdom, as taught by Marcus Aurelius, the understanding that true strength and success come not from external approval but from the quiet, steady pursuit of one's own highest ideals. In the teachings of Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophy, resentment and bitterness are considered dangerous emotions that can undermine one's ability to live a virtuous and fulfilling life. These emotions, rooted in the belief that we have been wronged or treated unfairly, often fester within us, poisoning our thoughts, actions, and relationships. For Marcus Aurelius, allowing resentment or bitterness to take hold was not only a failure to live in accordance with reason, but it was also a direct impediment to inner peace and happiness. To fully understand why he advised against harboring these emotions and why Stoicism advocates for their release, we must delve deeper into the nature of these feelings and their impact on both the mind and the soul. Resentment typically arises when we perceive that someone has wronged us in some way, whether by insult, betrayal, or perceived injustice. It is a lingering feeling, one that festers and grows over time, feeding on our sense of injustice and fueling a desire for retribution or revenge. Bitterness, closely related to resentment, is the corrosive result of holding on to such feelings for too long. Both emotions are destructive, not only to the individual experiencing them, but to the relationships and environments in which they live. Marcus Aurelius understood that allowing these emotions to take root in the mind was akin to poisoning oneself, slowly and deliberately, with the eventual result being the erosion of both inner tranquility and the ability to act with virtue. From a Stoic perspective, one of the central teachings is that we cannot control the actions or behavior of others, only how we respond to them. This is a foundational principle of the Stoic worldview. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that people act according to their own nature and that their actions, whether just or unjust, are outside of our control. What is within our control, however, is our response. To allow resentment to take hold is to surrender control of our own emotional state to the actions of others. In doing so, we hand over our peace of mind to external forces, which is precisely what Stoicism advises against. For Marcus Aurelius, the key to overcoming resentment and bitterness lies in the practice of forgiveness and understanding. He frequently wrote about the importance of empathy, of recognizing that others, too, are subject to their own weaknesses, flaws, and passions. When someone wrongs us, it is often a reflection of their own struggles, their own ignorance or lack of wisdom, rather than a deliberate attempt to harm us. Marcus Aurelius saw this as an opportunity for personal growth, a chance to practice compassion rather than harbor ill will. By understanding that the person who has wronged us is acting according to their own limited understanding of the world, we can begin to release the hold that resentment has on our hearts. Bitterness, in particular, is a corrosive emotion because it tends to grow over time, eating away at our sense of joy and well-being. The Stoics believed that holding on to bitterness was like carrying a heavy burden, a burden that only becomes more difficult to bear the longer we hold on to it. Marcus Aurelius would argue that this burden serves no purpose and only harms the person carrying it. By clinging to bitterness, we allow the past to dominate our present, preventing us from experiencing the peace and contentment that come from living in accordance with virtue. To release bitterness, Marcus Aurelius advocated for the practice of acceptance. The Stoics believed that much of the suffering we experience in life comes not from external events themselves, but from our resistance to those events. When we refuse to accept what has happened, when we cling to the belief that things should have been different, we create unnecessary suffering for ourselves. Resentment and bitterness are born from this refusal to accept reality. We become fixated on how we believe we were wronged, replaying the events in our minds and reinforcing our sense of injustice. In doing so, we trap ourselves in a cycle of suffering, unable to move forward or find peace. Marcus Aurelius wrote frequently about the importance of accepting what happens in life with grace and equanimity. He understood that life is full of challenges, setbacks, and injustices. But he also knew that how we respond to those challenges is what defines us. By accepting that others will sometimes wrong us, intentionally or unintentionally, we free ourselves from the emotional chains of resentment. This does not mean that we condone or excuse harmful behavior, but rather that we refuse to let it dictate our emotional state. Acceptance is a form of inner freedom. It allows us to move past the wrongs we have experienced and focus on living in accordance with our own principles and values. Another key aspect of Stoic philosophy that Marcus Aurelius emphasized was the idea that resentment is fundamentally irrational. From a Stoic standpoint, all emotions should be examined through the lens of reason. When we feel resentment, it is often because we believe that we have been wronged in a way that is unjust or unfair. However, the Stoics believed that it is not the actions of others that harm us, but our interpretation of those actions. We create suffering for ourselves by assigning meaning to events that may not actually align with reality. For instance, if someone insults us, we may choose to take offense and feel resentment, but that reaction is based on our own interpretation of the insult rather than on any inherent harm caused by the insult itself. In this way, resentment becomes an irrational response, one that clouds our judgment and prevents us from seeing the situation clearly. Marcus Aurelius would have urged us to question the validity of our resentment. Is it truly justified? Or are we allowing our emotions to cloud our reason? By examining our feelings in this way, we can begin to strip away the irrational aspects of resentment and see the situation more clearly. In many cases, we may realize that our resentment is based on misunderstandings or false assumptions. Even if we have been genuinely wronged, holding onto resentment only prolongs our suffering and keeps us trapped in a cycle of negative emotions. The rational response, according to Marcus Aurelius, is to let go of these emotions and focus on what we can control: our own thoughts, actions, and attitudes. One of the most profound lessons Marcus Aurelius offers in his writings is the idea that resentment and bitterness are fundamentally self-destructive. When we hold on to these emotions, we are the ones who suffer. The person who wronged us may be completely unaware of our feelings, or they may have moved on from the situation while we remain trapped in our own emotional turmoil. Resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. It does nothing to harm them, but slowly destroys us from within. Marcus Aurelius understood that in order to live a life of virtue and inner peace, we must release these toxic emotions and focus on what truly matters: our own personal growth and well-being. Marcus Aurelius frequently returned to the idea of impermanence. He reminded himself that life is fleeting and that we should not waste our limited time on earth harboring negative emotions like resentment and bitterness. Every moment spent dwelling on how we have been wronged is a moment lost, a moment that could have been spent pursuing wisdom, practicing virtue, or cultivating inner peace. Marcus Aurelius would encourage us to let go of resentment, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary for our own happiness and fulfillment. Furthermore, Marcus Aurelius believed that harboring resentment prevents us from acting in accordance with the Stoic ideal of universal love, kas, and praise, brotherhood, enos. The Stoics taught that all human beings are part of the same rational order, connected by a shared humanity. To hold resentment against another person is to deny this fundamental connection. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that even those who wrong us are part of the same universal order, and that their actions, however misguided, are the result of their own ignorance or lack of wisdom. By practicing forgiveness and compassion, we align ourselves with the Stoic ideal of treating all people with dignity and understanding, regardless of how they treat us. In this way, releasing resentment is not only an act of self-preservation, but also an expression of Stoic virtue. It allows us to rise above petty grievances and to act in accordance with our higher principles. When we choose to let go of bitterness, we free ourselves to focus on what truly matters, living a life of wisdom, courage, and compassion. We shift our attention away from the wrongs we have experienced and toward the opportunities for growth and self-improvement that each challenge presents. Ultimately, Marcus Aurelius believed that resentment and bitterness were obstacles to living a good life, a life grounded in reason, virtue, and inner peace. By holding on to these emotions, we not only harm ourselves, but also hinder our ability to act with integrity and purpose. The Stoic path is one of self-mastery, where we learn to control our emotions rather than allowing them to control us. By practicing forgiveness, acceptance, and understanding, we can free ourselves from the corrosive effects of resentment and bitterness and move forward on the path to wisdom and fulfillment. To live in accordance with Marcus Aurelius's teachings is to recognize that the true enemy is not the person who wronged us, but the resentment we carry within ourselves. This resentment poisons our minds, clouds our judgment, and prevents us from experiencing the inner peace that comes from living a life of virtue. By releasing these emotions, we reclaim our power and our freedom, allowing us to live fully in the present moment, unburdened by the past. Certainly, let's continue by diving deeper into the next 3 chapters. Chapter 4, Your Personal Sacrifices. Chapter 5, Your Philosophical Depth. And Chapter 6, Your Complaints, explaining them in detail as Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophy might approach these subjects. In the realm of Stoicism, making sacrifices is a vital part of living a life of virtue and discipline. However, Marcus Aurelius believed that one should not speak openly or boast about personal sacrifices. This teaching highlights a profound Stoic principle. True virtue lies not in the recognition or praise we receive from others, but in the intrinsic value of the act itself. Stoicism teaches that personal sacrifices should be made in the pursuit of what is good, just, and aligned with our inner sense of duty, without any expectation of external validation. When we sacrifice something meaningful, whether it be time, comfort, or personal ambition, the very act of giving something up for a higher cause should be its own reward. The moment we begin to share or talk about these sacrifices, we open ourselves up to the temptation of seeking approval from others. This, Marcus Aurelius would argue, diminishes the purity of the act, as it shifts the focus away from the virtue of self-discipline toward the shallow realm of external validation. In Stoic terms, everything we do should be aligned with virtue. And virtue is something that does not require an audience. Marcus Aurelius understood that personal sacrifices are often necessary in life, especially in positions of leadership or responsibility. As emperor, he undoubtedly faced numerous personal sacrifices, yet his philosophy was clear. These sacrifices were part of his duty, and to seek recognition for them would be both vain and unnecessary. He reminds us through his writings that what truly matters is doing the right thing, because it is right, not because we want to be seen doing it. A significant danger in sharing personal sacrifices is the shift it can create in our motivations. Human beings are social creatures by nature, and we tend to seek approval and validation from those around us. However, Stoicism teaches that we should not depend on external validation for our sense of worth or fulfillment. When we share our sacrifices, we run the risk of turning our virtuous acts into acts performed for the sake of praise. In doing so, we lose sight of the true purpose behind the sacrifice itself. Marcus Aurelius would remind us that the highest reward comes from within, from the knowledge that we have acted in accordance with our values and principles. Sharing our personal sacrifices with others can foster a sense of entitlement or superiority. We might begin to believe that because we have sacrificed something, we are deserving of special treatment or recognition. This sense of entitlement runs counter to the Stoic ideal of humility and selflessness. The Stoics believed that we should be indifferent to praise and recognition, focusing instead on living a life of quiet dignity and purpose. Marcus Aurelius understood that the pursuit of virtue often requires us to give up personal comforts and desires, but these sacrifices should be made with grace and without complaint. By keeping our sacrifices private, we preserve the purity of our intentions and avoid the pitfalls of ego and pride. This also ties into the broader Stoic concept of duty. For Marcus Aurelius, duty was central to living a virtueful life. Whether it was his duty as a ruler, a father, or a philosopher, he understood that personal sacrifices were often necessary to fulfill these roles. However, he also believed that duty should be performed without the expectation of reward or recognition. To boast about one's sacrifices is to misunderstand the nature of duty. A Stoic knows that duty is its own reward, and the satisfaction of fulfilling one's responsibilities should be enough. At the heart of Marcus Aurelius's teachings on sacrifice is the idea that we should not place ourselves at the center of our own narratives. When we sacrifice something, it is not about us, but about the greater good or the higher purpose we are serving. By keeping our sacrifices private, we remove our ego from the equation and ensure that our actions are truly aligned with our values and principles. This is the essence of Stoic virtue, acting in accordance with reason and duty without seeking praise or recognition. For Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, philosophy was not a matter of intellectual showmanship or public display. It was a way of life, a practical guide to living with virtue, reason, and tranquility. The depth of one's philosophical understanding was something to be cultivated internally, not paraded or flaunted for others to see. Stoicism teaches that true wisdom is silent, humble, and introspective. To boast about one's philosophical insights or to share them for the sake of appearing wise is to betray the very essence of what philosophy is meant to be. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the importance of keeping one's philosophical insights private. His meditations, which were never intended for public consumption, are a testament to his belief that philosophy is a personal journey. He used these writings to remind himself of Stoic principles, to correct his own behavior, and to strengthen his commitment to living a virtuous life. The act of writing these meditations was, for him, a tool for self-improvement, not a means of showcasing his philosophical depth to others. The Stoics believed that wisdom and philosophical understanding were to be lived, not displayed. Philosophy was not about engaging in debates or demonstrating intellectual superiority. It was about cultivating inner strength, resilience, and peace of mind. To share one's philosophical depth with others, especially for the sake of impressing them, is to miss the point entirely. Wisdom, according to Marcus Aurelius, is not something to be performed, but something to be embodied in one's actions, choices, and way of life. Sharing one's philosophical insights with others can also lead to vanity, as we may become more concerned with how others perceive our wisdom than with the wisdom itself. This desire for external validation is antithetical to Stoicism, which teaches that we should be indifferent to the opinions of others. Marcus Aurelius would caution us against allowing our philosophical understanding to become a source of pride or ego. Instead, he would encourage us to focus on applying philosophical principles in our daily lives, quietly and without fanfare. Another danger of sharing one's philosophical depth is the risk of diluting or distorting the philosophy itself. Philosophy, for the Stoics, was a deeply personal endeavor. Each individual must engage with the principles of Stoicism in their own way, according to their own understanding and experience. By sharing our insights with others, we may unintentionally impose our own interpretations on them, leading to misunderstandings or misapplications of the philosophy. Marcus Aurelius would remind us that the true value of philosophy lies in its ability to guide us towards self-mastery and inner peace, not in its ability to impress or persuade others. Sharing one's philosophical insights can create unnecessary conflict or debate. Philosophy, by its nature, is subject to interpretation, and different people may have different views on what constitutes wisdom or virtue. When we share our philosophical depth with others, we may invite disagreement or criticism, which can distract us from our own pursuit of virtue. Marcus Aurelius would urge us to avoid unnecessary conflict and to focus on our own philosophical development rather than trying to convince others of our understanding. In keeping one's philosophical depth private, we maintain the integrity of our pursuit of wisdom. Marcus Aurelius believed that philosophy was a tool for self-improvement, not for self-promotion. By keeping our insights to ourselves, we ensure that our focus remains on applying the principles of Stoicism in our own lives, rather than on seeking approval or recognition from others. This allows us to live in accordance with virtue, quietly and humbly, without the distractions of vanity or ego. Stoicism teaches that life is full of challenges, setbacks, and difficulties, but that how we respond to these challenges is what defines us. For Marcus Aurelius, complaining about one's circumstances was not only unproductive, but it also undermined the Stoic ideal of resilience, self-mastery, and acceptance. Complaints are a form of resistance to reality, a refusal to accept the world as it is. Marcus Aurelius believed that complaining served no purpose other than to amplify our own suffering and to distract us from the work of improving ourselves and our situation. To complain is to focus on what is beyond our control. Stoicism teaches that we should concern ourselves only with what we can control, our own thoughts, actions, and attitudes. External circumstances, such as the behavior of others or the challenges we face, are beyond our control. Complaining about these things does nothing to change them. It only reinforces our sense of helplessness and frustration. Marcus Aurelius would remind us that by focusing on what we can control, our response to adversity, we can find strength, resilience, and peace of mind. Complaining also shifts the focus away from personal responsibility. When we complain, we often blame external circumstances or other people for our problems, rather than taking responsibility for our own role in the situation. Marcus Aurelius believed that true Stoic virtue lies in taking full responsibility for one's own actions and attitudes, regardless of external circumstances. By complaining, we absolve ourselves of this responsibility and place the burden of our happiness on things outside of our control. Another key aspect of Stoicism is the idea that life is full of impermanence and unpredictability. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that everything in life, from our possessions to our relationships, is temporary and subject to change. Complaining about the inevitable ups and downs of life is, in essence, a refusal to accept this fundamental truth. The Stoics believed that we should approach life with equanimity, accepting both the good and the bad with grace and composure. Complaints, by contrast, reflect a lack of acceptance and a desire for life to conform to our expectations, rather than an understanding that life is inherently unpredictable. Complaining also has a corrosive effect on our relationships and environment. When we constantly voice our grievances, we spread negativity to those around us, creating an atmosphere of dissatisfaction and discontent. Marcus Aurelius would advise us to practice silence in the face of adversity, using challenges as opportunities for personal growth rather than as excuses to vent our frustrations. By keeping our complaints to ourselves, we preserve the tranquility of our minds and the harmony of our relationships. Complaining is often a form of self-indulgence. It allows us to wallow in our own misery, seeking sympathy or validation from others. This runs counter to the Stoic ideal of self-reliance and resilience. Marcus Aurelius would urge us to rise above the temptation to indulge in self-pity and to focus instead on taking constructive action. When we face difficulties, we should ask ourselves what we can do to improve the situation, rather than wasting time and energy on complaints. By refusing to complain, we cultivate a mindset of gratitude and acceptance. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on the blessings he had received, even in the midst of hardship. He understood that life is a mixture of joy and suffering, and that to focus solely on the negative is to ignore the many positive aspects of existence. Stoicism teaches us to be grateful for what we have, rather than to complain about what we lack. In this way, we cultivate inner peace and contentment regardless of our external circumstances. In essence, Marcus Aurelius believed that complaints were a distraction from the work of living a virtuous life. They prevent us from focusing on what truly matters, our own thoughts, actions, and attitudes. By keeping our complaints to ourselves, we preserve our inner tranquility, take responsibility for our own happiness, and approach life with grace and resilience. Stoicism teaches us that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond, and complaining is never the right response. Marcus Aurelius's teachings on sacrifice, philosophical depth, and complaints all align with the broader Stoic principles of humility, self-discipline, and acceptance. By keeping these aspects of our lives private and focusing on our internal development, we can live in accordance with virtue, free from the distractions of external validation, ego, and negativity. Resentment and bitterness were emotions Marcus Aurelius cautioned against, as we explored earlier. Likewise, the Stoic view extends this teaching to many other areas of human life, such as judgment of others, the performance of good deeds, misfortunes, and thoughts on mortality. Marcus Aurelius believed that by focusing inward and avoiding unnecessary disclosures of these personal experiences, one could cultivate a life of greater inner strength, emotional control, and virtue. This Stoic approach wasn't a prescription for isolation or coldness, but a call to greater self-mastery, clarity, and, most importantly, tranquility. When Marcus Aurelius reflected on the idea of judging others or sharing their mistakes, he saw the futility and harm that such behaviors could cause. To the Stoic mind, criticizing or exposing the faults of others is not only pointless, but also detrimental to one's own moral character. Stoicism teaches that we are each responsible for our own actions, thoughts, and decisions, and to dwell on or highlight the faults of others is to divert attention from our own need for self-improvement. Marcus Aurelius would have reminded himself that each person acts according to their own nature and circumstances, often shaped by ignorance, emotion, or fear. He understood that, instead of casting judgment or airing someone else's mistakes, it was far better to practice compassion and humility. In the Stoic worldview, focusing on the mistakes of others distracts from the vital work of personal development. Marcus Aurelius believed that the only person whose behavior we have control over is ourselves, and to squander energy on another's shortcomings is to waste time that could be better spent improving oneself. To expose or speak about the mistakes of others, whether to criticize or gossip, compromises this effort at self-mastery. By engaging in judgmental behavior, we are pulled into a cycle of arrogance and superiority, which is contrary to Stoic humility and the understanding that we, too, are flawed and in need of constant improvement. Furthermore, sharing the faults of others invites negativity and conflict into one's life. The Stoic belief in living in harmony with others means that one should avoid actions that foster discord or ill will. By sharing someone else's mistakes, we not only damage relationships, but also propagate negativity, which can reverberate back into our own lives. Marcus Aurelius knew that maintaining inner peace and external harmony required avoiding unnecessary entanglements in the affairs of others, especially when those affairs involved moral or personal failings. By refraining from judging or exposing others, we keep our focus on our own journey toward virtue and wisdom. Marcus Aurelius would also have emphasized the futility of dwelling on the mistakes of others from a philosophical standpoint. He often reflected on the impermanence of human life, the fleeting nature of time, and the insignificance of most worldly concerns. From this perspective, to become preoccupied with the faults of others is to invest energy in something transient and inconsequential. Stoicism teaches that we should rise above trivial concerns and focus on what truly matters, the cultivation of our own virtue, wisdom, and inner tranquility. The errors of others, while perhaps regrettable, are ultimately beyond our control and should not divert us from our higher purpose. The performance of good deeds was another area in which Marcus Aurelius cautioned against seeking recognition or acknowledgement. In the Stoic framework, good deeds should be done for their own sake, not for praise or reward. When we share our good deeds with others, we run the risk of turning those acts into displays of vanity or self-promotion, undermining their true value. Marcus Aurelius believed that the greatest acts of virtue are those performed quietly, without fanfare or expectation of external validation. In this way, good deeds remain pure expressions of our commitment to virtue, untainted by the desire for approval or recognition. One of the dangers of sharing our good deeds is that it can shift our focus from the deed itself to how others perceive it. Instead of acting out of genuine concern for others or a desire to do what is right, we may begin to act in ways that are designed to elicit praise or admiration. This is a subtle but significant corruption of the Stoic ideal. Marcus Aurelius would remind us that true virtue lies in acting with integrity, regardless of whether anyone is watching or acknowledging our efforts. When we seek recognition for our good deeds, we are no longer acting out of pure virtue, but out of a desire for external validation. Furthermore, sharing our good deeds can create a sense of entitlement or expectation. We may begin to believe that because we have done something good, we are deserving of praise, reward, or special treatment. This mindset is antithetical to the Stoic principle of selflessness and humility. Marcus Aurelius understood that good deeds should be performed without any thought of personal gain or recognition. To act with virtue is its own reward, and the satisfaction of knowing that we have done the right thing should be enough. By keeping our good deeds private, we preserve the integrity of our actions and avoid the trap of vanity or entitlement. In addition to preserving the purity of our actions, keeping our good deeds private helps to cultivate humility. Stoicism teaches that we should be indifferent to praise and recognition, focusing instead on living in accordance with virtue. Marcus Aurelius believed that humility was a cornerstone of Stoic wisdom, and by refraining from sharing our good deeds, we guard against the ego's desire for approval. When we act quietly and without seeking recognition, we strengthen our character and deepen our commitment to the Stoic ideal of self-mastery. When it came to misfortunes, Marcus Aurelius believed that dwelling on or sharing them with others served little purpose. Stoicism teaches that suffering is an inevitable part of life and that how we respond to it determines our character. Marcus Aurelius would have reminded himself that misfortunes, like all external events, are beyond our control. What we can control is how we interpret and react to these events. By focusing on the negative aspects of our circumstances or sharing our misfortunes with others, we risk amplifying our suffering and losing sight of the opportunity for personal growth that adversity presents. Sharing our misfortunes with others can also foster a sense of victimhood or helplessness. When we dwell on what has gone wrong, we reinforce the belief that we are powerless in the face of external events. This mindset runs counter to Stoicism's emphasis on resilience, self-reliance, and emotional control. Marcus Aurelius believed that misfortunes were opportunities to practice Stoic virtues such as patience, courage, and acceptance. By keeping our focus on what we can control, our response to adversity, we maintain our inner strength and avoid becoming consumed by negativity. Furthermore, sharing our misfortunes can create an unhealthy dependency on the sympathy or validation of others. While it is natural to seek comfort or support in times of hardship, Stoicism teaches that true strength comes from within. Marcus Aurelius would urge us to cultivate inner resilience, drawing on our own wisdom and fortitude to navigate life's challenges. By relying too heavily on external sources of comfort, we weaken our ability to endure adversity on our own. The Stoic ideal is to remain calm and composed in the face of misfortune, trusting in our own ability to overcome whatever life may throw our way. Another reason to refrain from sharing misfortunes is that it can lead to unnecessary conflict or tension in our relationships. When we share our struggles with others, we may inadvertently place a burden on them or create an expectation that they should help or fix our problems. This can strain relationships and foster feelings of guilt, resentment, or frustration. Marcus Aurelius believed that we should strive to live in harmony with others, and by keeping our misfortunes private, we preserve the peace and balance in our relationships. Instead of seeking sympathy, we should focus on cultivating inner strength and resilience, knowing that we have the capacity to endure life's difficulties without placing that burden on others. Marcus Aurelius also believed that death and mortality were subjects that should be approached with contemplation and acceptance rather than fear or anxiety. The Stoics taught that death is a natural part of life and that to fear it is to misunderstand its place in the grand order of things. Marcus Aurelius would have urged us to reflect on death as a way to gain perspective and clarity, not as a subject to be feared or dwelled upon in conversation with others. Sharing our thoughts on death with others can often lead to discomfort or anxiety, both for ourselves and for those around us. Death is a deeply personal subject, and each individual must come to terms with it in their own way. Marcus Aurelius believed that reflecting on mortality was a valuable tool for cultivating wisdom and virtue, but that it was not something to be shared lightly. By keeping our meditations on death private, we create a space for personal growth and contemplation, free from the judgments or fears of others. In Stoicism, the focus is not on avoiding death, but on living well in the time we have. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that life is fleeting and that we should not waste it on trivial concerns or fears. By contemplating death privately, we can come to terms with its inevitability and use that understanding to guide our actions and decisions. Sharing our thoughts on death with others may invite unnecessary fear or distraction, pulling us away from the Stoic ideal of living in accordance with virtue and reason. In keeping these reflections private, Marcus Aurelius believed that we could maintain a sense of peace and composure, even in the face of life's greatest unknown, by focusing on what we can control, how we live in the present. We free ourselves from the fear of death and the anxiety that often accompanies it. In the words of Marcus Aurelius and the Stoic tradition, true strength comes from within. The path to a life of wisdom, resilience, and inner peace is one of quiet self-mastery, where we guard our hearts and minds from unnecessary distractions and the pursuit of external validation. By keeping our struggles, sacrifices, philosophical insights, and thoughts on life's inevitable trials private, we protect the purity of our intentions and maintain focus on what truly matters, living in alignment with virtue and reason. This approach not only fosters personal growth and inner calm, but also allows us to move through life with a sense of dignity, purpose, and clarity, unaffected by the opinions, judgments, or chaos of the outside world. The Stoic path is not about isolating ourselves from others, but about cultivating an unwavering inner strength that guides us through both the joys and sorrows of life. As you reflect on these teachings, remember that your greatest power lies not in what you share with the world, but in how you master the world within yourself. In a world that often encourages us to seek approval and attention, let us instead seek the quiet, steady pursuit of virtue, a journey that begins within. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. As we strive to master ourselves and live with purpose, remember, true strength and peace come from within. If you found value in these reflections, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more insights. Until next time, keep pursuing the path of virtue and inner strength. Stay strong, stay stoic.